So for currency exchange, the same proportions that we've been using for unit price, the same proportions we were using for changing different measurements, we're going to use the same thing for currency exchange as well. So this idea of proportions is super powerful because we can solve so many things with it. I checked this morning. The exchange rate is 1 Canadian dollar is equal to 75 cents US. Right? 3 years ago, 1 Canadian dollar was 1 US dollar. The highest I've ever seen it is 1 Canadian dollar was $1.12. So then the Canadian dollar was worth even more than the US dollar. That would have been really nice right now. Although there are advantages to having the Canadian dollar lower, it depends on what you're doing. If you're selling stuff to the United States, so any kind of business in Canada that exports something, or if you were selling online things and people were buying them from the US, if you put your prices in US dollars, you would now be making more money than you were before. The problem is whenever you travel or whenever you want to buy something from the US, it's now more expensive. So here's our first example. You have 80 Canadian dollars and you want to know how much that would be worth in US or American dollars. So we set up our proportion, the same as we've done before. What do we want to find? We don't know how much it would be in US dollars. That's what we want to find. But we know we have 80 Canadian dollars. When you look online, US dollars is USD. Canadian dollars is CAD. And what do we know? We know that 1 Canadian dollar is equal to 75 cents US. So which one am I going to put on the top of my proportion? The 75 or the 1? The 75, because on the top I have US dollars, so I have to put 0.75 US dollars, and that's equal to 1 Canadian dollar. So if I wanted to solve this for x, I'm dividing by 80, so I'd have to multiply both sides by 80. I'd go to my calculator, 0.75 divided by 1 times by 80. And you will get your $80 Canadian is only worth $60 US. Ugh, feels like you lost $20. You could divide 80 by 4 here, that would give you 20, right? And that's 1/4 of it, and then subtract it off. But then something good happens for part B here. You're cleaning your room, you find an old pair of pants, you haven't worn them for some time. Inside the pocket, you find 130 US dollars. How much? So you're like, woohoo! So you go to the bank and you say, I'd like to change this back to Canadian dollars. How much would it be worth? So now we want to figure out this proportion. We start the same way, but now we want to find out our x is what we don't know is Canadian dollars, but we know we have 130 US dollars. Now when I set up the proportion, now that I'm finding Canadian dollars, I'm going to put my exchange rate. I know that 1 Canadian dollar was equal to 75 cents US dollars. So my proportion on the right gets flipped because now I'm trying to find Canadian dollars, and I put Canadian dollars on the top and US dollars on the bottom. So now if I multiply both sides by 130, one divided by 0.75 times by 130, you actually found $173. Now, depending on how old the pair of pants were, you might have exchanged that money when it was 1 Canadian dollar was 1 US dollar. So you bought 130 US dollars for 130 Canadian, left it in your pants for 3 years, found it later, and when you went back to the bank, it's now worth $173. So if we had all been really smart 3 years ago, we would have taken everything that we owned, sold it into Canadian dollars, traded all our Canadian dollars for US dollars, and then just waited for 3 years. You wouldn't have known. That's the only problem. Yes. Yeah. Everybody ready for the second example? Okay, we're going to travel here. We're going to travel to London, and we're going to stay in the 5-star Savoy Hotel. I looked online. It's only 738 Canadian a night.
Wow, 38 or 40?
740. Well, I rounded it up. It was 738 this morning. That's a little expensive. Now, another website offers the hotel for 500 euros a night. Which is a better deal? The Euro one's a better deal because it's 500 is less than 740?
No, it's because I already did the calculation.
Oh, you did the calculations already. Okay. Well, we're going to figure it out. So we have to decide, this is sort of like unit pricing and currency exchange combined. We need to figure out which is the better price. And we're going to figure out our unit price is going to be the price per night, but we have to choose which currency we'd like to look at. Probably, since we're used to Canadian dollars, we're going to look at the Canadian dollars per night. Now, one of them is already in Canadian dollars per night. What do we have to change? We have to change the other one. We have to find out how much 500 euros is in Canadian dollars. So this is our question. How much is, here's the symbol for euros. So this is our question. We're really concerned about how much is 500 euros in Canadian dollars. Because if it's less than 740, that one's a better deal. So we set up our proportion. Whoa. This is really not happy for me right now. So for our proportion, we want to know how much Canadian dollars, so we don't know. We know we have 500 euro. What we know is an exchange rate is that 1 Canadian dollar is equal to 0.68 euros. So in order to solve for x, we'd have to want to get rid of this 500 on both sides. I'm going to have to cancel them by multiplying both sides by 500. 500 divided by 0.68 is $735.29. So we can say that the 500 euro per night is a better deal by $4.79. Now, what you'll find though is if you buy something online, even though you know the exchange rate, for example, 75 cents to $1 for Canada to US, even though you know the exchange rate, when you actually buy it online, maybe you pay with PayPal, maybe you pay and your PayPal goes to your bank account, what the bank does is they charge you a different amount than the exchange rate, because the banks will always make money on exchange rates. So they have a buying rate and a selling rate. Yeah. And when you're talking about a buying rate and a selling rate, it's always from the bank's perspective. What they're selling and what they're buying. So it's always going to be opposite of what you want to do. If you want to buy euros, you have to look at the selling rate. If you want to get rid of your euros, you have to look, because you want to sell them, you have to look at the buying rate. So we have to think it's always the bank's perspective, which is always not your perspective. It's always the opposite. There's the buying rate. The buying rate is what the bank is buying it as, so not what you want to buy. If you want to buy, think of the opposite. You look at the selling rate. If you want to sell something, you want to get rid of your extra euros, you're going to have to look at the buying rate.
What if you're selling something from Canadian to USD?
So you have Canadian, and you want to buy US dollars, you would look at the selling rate. What are they selling US dollars for? So are we ready? Not yet? Okay. There are the bank's rates. Buying rate, if you wanted to buy €1, and the selling rate. Okay. So there's a 10-cent difference. Usually what the actual currency exchange is, like if you looked online, it would be right in the middle. $1.45 is what the actual exchange online would be, but the banks will add a certain amount and subtract a certain amount. So if you want 150 euros, you want to buy 150 euros, which one are you going to look at? Buying rate or selling rate? The selling rate. It's always the opposite of what, because it's the bank's, you want euros? You want to buy euros? So then the bank is selling. And they'll sell you €1 for $1.50. But then so if you buy €1, it's going to cost you $1.50. You go, 2 seconds later, you go, you know what? No, maybe not. Okay, they say, here's your $1.40 back. You're like, I paid $1.50. Sorry, that's the differences in exchange rates. So they're gonna take 10 cents on every exchange. And so that's how they make their money. So here, you want €150. How much will it cost? Well, what don't we know? We don't know how much it's going to cost in Canadian. We set up our proportion, €150. What do we know? That it costs $1.50 for one, whoops, wrong symbol, for €1. Yeah. Multiply both sides by 150 for the algebra, and you will get that x is equal to 225 Canadian. So if you wanted €150, it's going to cost you 225 Canadians. Later, you realize that your parents changed the trip. You're no longer going to Europe, you're going to Steinbach instead. So you don't need your 225 Canadian change to euros, but you have €150. So you go back to the bank and say, I want to change this back to Canadian. So you want to get rid of it. You want to sell it. What's the bank doing? The bank is buying. So you're looking for the buying rate, because the bank is now buying it back. So you want to know how much Canadian you're going to get for your €150. And now you're looking at the buying rate, $1 Canadian. Or sorry, €1 is $1.40 Canadian. 140 Canadian is €1. And so now when you multiply by 150 and multiply by 150, you only get $210 back. And so they just made $15 from the exchange.